What is up guys, it's your boy Solheim here, back with another Classic WoW video for Mists of Pandaria Classic. Now today we're going to be talking about a scenario, well I was going to say a feature coming out in Mists of Pandaria, but either way, we're talking about scenarios today, and I kind of want to talk about how you can make scenarios even better in Mists of Pandaria Classic than it was back in original Mists of Pandaria. So what are scenarios? Well, I've actually recorded myself doing a scenario, so we can throw that up in the background while talking about it, so here we go. So scenarios is something you can queue up with through the regular dungeon finder, or I guess we should call it group finder now, because you have dungeon finder, scenarios, raid finder. We also have something called flexible raids, and well, in Classic WoW we also have the pre-made group finder as well for various content such as dungeons, quests, you name it. So basically pre-made group finder. Now from here you can queue up for scenarios, and for scenarios in Mists of Pandaria we have regular scenarios coming out at launch, and we have heroic scenarios coming out in patch 5.3. So as you can see right here, completing a normal scenario would give me 40 valor points, a bonus cache of treasures, which is basically a blue item, and some reputation with the anglers, because that is my favorite reputation at the moment. That is the one that I have starred, so you can get like bonus rep every single day by doing one daily heroic dungeon, or daily normal dungeon, and a daily scenario. So you will want to do scenarios anyway, even just for the reputation, but it can also be a great way to get valor points and gear yourself up at the start. Now, what are scenarios then? A scenario is basically a 3-man mini dungeon, and I think that's the best way to explain it, because it's a small dungeon. You can do it in, like this one right here for example, will take about 5 minutes to do, and how long the scenario takes depends on your group and the scenario you get, but usually it's between 5 and 10 minutes per scenario, and that way you can just get a couple of valor points, and once again it's a mini dungeon. You will not get loot from every single boss, but once again from the bonus cache at the end, you will get one guaranteed piece of loot on your first scenario of the day. Now, like I just said, regular scenarios comes out at the start of Mists of Pandaria, and heroic scenarios comes out in patch 5.3, which is kind of a middle patch between Throne of Thunder and the Siege of Orgrimmar. I think it's called the Landfall or something like that. Like, we're getting some brand new daily quests, we have an event happening back in Kalimdor, for example. In Durotar there's an event happening. It's basically a pre-patch for patch 5.4 if you ask me. So in patch 5.3 we are getting heroic dungeons, or heroic scenarios I mean, but in my opinion they should come out faster, and I don't think they should be here at launch. I think having normal scenarios at the start is more than good enough, but if you take heroic scenarios and give us that in either 5.1 or 5.2, now if you ask me, 5.2 would arguably be the best time to launch this, just because, well, it makes a lot of sense, and we also have a new raid coming out in 5.2, Throne of Thunder, we have the Isle of Thunder. Giving us heroic scenarios at the earlier time just makes sense, because the thing about scenarios is, when it's launching at the launch, they are somewhat relevant because people are trying to cap their valor points. Even the bonus cache at the end gives you 463 item level gear, which is quite relevant at the really early stages of the expansion. But the problem about scenarios is that it really falls off very fast, so you might see everyone doing scenarios in week 1 and week 2, but after the first month, almost nobody's gonna do scenarios anymore, and this is how it was back in Mists of Pandaria, and it's been how it's been on private servers as well. Scenarios are usually very relevant at the start and falls off very fast. And even though heroic scenarios kind of brings them back to being relevant again, it doesn't really last for long, because in patch 5.4 we're getting access to the Timeless Isle, giving us many like catch-up mechanics and fast ways to gear up on the Timeless Isle as well. So I feel like whenever heroic scenarios came out, it was a little bit too late, or once again we had the same issue, where people did them for a week or two and then they instantly fell off, and people just never came back again. So what I would propose is having regular scenarios at launch, and heroic scenarios either in patch 5.1 or 5.2. I think 5.2 makes the most sense, because what I'm about to introduce here is that we could be getting mythic scenarios, allowing you even even better loot from scenarios, and that should come out in patch 5.4 when we're getting mythic raids. So at the same time as getting mythic raids, we could get mythic scenarios, and that way you could keep scenarios being relevant. And by pushing heroic scenarios back to 5.2 as well, so we get them earlier, they also remain relevant in patch 5.2 and 5.3, or in the equivalent phases in Mists of Pandaria Classic, so you just keep scenarios relevant for much more of the expansion's lifespan. Now, even though you don't need gear from scenarios, a lot of people will use scenarios to to cap their valor point every single week, so keeping scenarios relevant will be important simply for that aspect, because that way you're not just capping your valor points, but you can get some somewhat relevant gear at the same time as well. So for me, just keeping scenarios relevant would be a massive quality of life increase to a Mists of Pandaria Classic, and it's also one thing that doesn't really require much work from the team. All they would have to do is tune the numbers and give us one more difficulty of scenarios, which would be mythic, which could have like, I don't know, 50% more health, more damage, and just have the same mechanics but simply do more damage and have more health. Now, when it comes to changes like this, you obviously have two sides of the story. You either can stay true to the expansion and just release the expansion the way it was, or you can decide to make some improvements where necessary to make the expansion the best version it can be in Classic WoW. And I personally think that making changes would be the right way to go. The voice crack. Dude, I'm still sick. I'm sorry. Either way, I think making changes would be the right way to go, because if we're gonna go past Mists of Pandaria, a couple of expansions do need some changes. Warlords of Draenor was a pretty decent expansion, but it was very lackluster in the open world content, so I feel like they could make some adjustments in Warlords of Draenor to turn it from an okay expansion to a very good expansion. Blackrock Foundry, for example, very good raid. Hellfire Citadel, also very good raid. And if we're gonna look even further into the future, Legion was a very good expansion, but the beginning kinda sucked, when legendaries was RNG, and if you got a bad legendary, well, you pretty much had to reroll, or you would be benched. If you got a good legendary, everyone and their mother wanted you in their raid team, so literally, whether you had a raid spot or not, depended entirely on RNG, and also, once you got one legendary, you had a bigger chance to get your second one, but then it diminished after that. So if you got two bad legendaries in a row, you basically had to scrap the character and level up a new one. I was one of those people who got two bad legendaries, and I simply had to reroll or wait. So I just waited until the next patch, when they fixed that RNG-ness, and you can then basically focus legendaries, and you had catch-up mechanics. So I feel like if they just... At the end of Legion, it was a very good expansion, but at the start, it was a little bit, like, rocky. So I personally feel like the earlier we start talking about making changes to Classic WoW expansions to possibly make them better and give a better player experience, the better every single expansion will be. And for Mists of Pandaria, I feel like once again scenarios is one of those features that was introduced in Mists of Pandaria and had a lot of they had a lot of potential, but it really fell flat, because it was always irrelevant content, and they've kind of tried to go back into scenarios in future expansions, like for example Battle for Azeroth we had Island Expeditions, which was basically a scenario but in Battle for Azeroth, so it's kind of clear that Blizzard liked the idea behind scenarios, but the execution kind of just fell flat, and the reason for that is that it was always irrelevant content. It only managed to stay relevant for a couple of weeks at a time, so once again, regular scenarios at launch, heroic scenarios either in 5.1 or 5.2, and then mythic scenarios to spice things up. So I personally believe that improving scenarios could be a massive quality of life increase to Mists of Pandaria Classic, and at this point we're only a few months away from the actual release of Mists of Pandaria Classic, so I kind of want to ask you guys, what quality of life changes would you like to see in Mists of Pandaria Classic? Let me know that in the comments down below. And as we're getting towards the end of the video, I just want to mention that I do have a gold making guide for Mists of Pandaria Classic, which covers a bunch of ways you can farm for gold or simply craft for gold as well. It covers a bunch of different ways to make gold in Mists of Pandaria Classic. It is currently 85 pages long, and if I do make additions to the page or additions to the guide, there we go, you will get the updates sent to you for free when you buy the guide. You also at the moment get the Cataclysm guide that I made for the prior expansion, or I guess the current expansion right now. You get that one in the same purchase, effectively giving you 2 guides for the price of 1. That way you can use the Cataclysm guide to make gold right now before Mists of Pandaria comes out, and then you can throw that one away and start using the Mists of Pandaria one when Mists of Pandaria Classic actually comes out. So you can basically use the Cataclysm guide to prepare yourself for Mists of Pandaria Classic. Either way, you can learn more about the guide through the link down below in the video description. And that's pretty much it for today, so once again, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like down below as well, it really helps me out. Either way, thank you for watching, I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you again in the next video very soon.